J.C. Jackson, CB1. Asante Samuel, CB2. Bryce Callahan, Michael Davis, flip however you want. They can be CB3, CB4. CB5, 6, 7, 8, 9, however many he wants to have. CB5 and 6, let's call it that. I think that's where the bloodbath starts. Last year, it started off so strong for Tevaughn Campbell. He had that scoop and score. Everyone was loving it. It was great. And then just got absolutely destroyed the rest of the season. And some of that is to his fault. Some of that is just because the Chargers got decimated by injuries and he was having to go up against wide receiver 1s and 2s. But you had Tevaughn Campbell, who just got obliterated all season. You had Kemon Hall, who played a bit last year, who has, more time underneath Staley's scheme, but still didn't play great. And then you got the new guys. You've got Nasir Taylor, you got Brendan Sebastian, you got Deane Leonard. So in my eyes, Jake, I have CB5 and 6 being the camp battles to look for. Who do you see kind of coming out with those battles?
You have, if you just went with CB 1 through 4, it's very easy to figure out. J.C. Jackson, Asante Samuel Jr., Bryce Callahan, and Michael Davis. Now, beyond that, if you're just talking about the corners, I think Tevaughn Campbell has a little bit that he needs to make up for himself, because when he was put in starting roles, especially as it got more towards the middle of the year, when the injuries really started to happen, as you mentioned, it kind of just took a drastic left turn.
Minnesota, that game was rough.
Took a drastic left turn for him. So I think he's coming into camp with a lot to prove. Kemon Hall is in a similar boat with that. Deane Leonard, I know, from mandatory minicamp, albeit, you're going up against third stringers, he had a pretty nice start to camp. And if you read Popper's article that came out when that was going out on back in May, it basically, if Deane Leonard is making this roster, then is Nasir Taylor making this roster. Combining the cornerbacks and the safeties, I have them collectively keeping 10. So if we're just talking about the cornerbacks here, you have your 4, CB1 through 4 that we've already named off. And then it really comes down to, is it Tevaughn Campbell? Is it Kemon Hall? Nasir Taylor? Deane Leonard? There was a big case of why Taylor and Leonard were drafted this year, especially when it comes to the special teams aspect, hoping to improve that area coming into this season. So there may have been some input from the Chargers special teams coach that comes into making both of these selections. So they may have a leg up in that scenario. And just based off of what we have heard thus far in mandatory minicamp, Deane Leonard may have the leg up on Nasir Taylor right now. So those are the two guys that I'll go with to say round out the 6 cornerbacks.
I think it's going to come down to Deane Leonard, Nasir Taylor, and Kemon Hall fighting for 2 spots. Would you rather have Joe Reed as your wide receiver kind of specialist returner, or Nasir Taylor as your secondary depth / special teams guy?
See, it's an interesting question to ask, just considering, let's just say if you were to keep Joe Reed as your wide receiver 6, and if you're making the argument to say, okay, well, where's the contribution really going to come from Joe Reed? Are you going to be able to utilize him offensively more than you did 2 years ago when you scored 1 touchdown with him?
Sure,
and then he's essentially never heard of since then. And the fact of that I bring that up is because obviously he's already kind of going to be in his, you're not going to necessarily use him as a returner because that spot has already essentially been taken.
Punt returner, you could use punt returner,
wide receiver
maybe.
5 as well. Yeah, he does have that flexible skill set that he could possibly master that. That's a good question. That's actually a good breakdown when you really think about it. So in that circumstance, do you still have them keeping 6 or 7 cornerbacks if you're battling him between Reed and Taylor?
It would be 6. And I think in my eyes, I probably would, just looking at possible production that you can get out of them, I think Staley's going to be able to get more out of the defense and having secondary rotation than he would need to have offense rotation and utilizing a Joe Reed. Because Joe Reed and DeAndre Carter are kind of redundant in that. Kind of. So if it was those two, I think I would err to the side of Nasir Taylor. But I think that's what's going to come down to. I think when the front office is looking at it, which ones could they get more out of? Nasir Taylor or Joe Reed?